I'll just start and share a little bit about myself. The city I should actually live in is London. My celebrity bridesmaid would apparently be Beyonce because we both give awesome gifts. I'm pretty sure hers are much better than mine. And if I were a Barbie, I'd be astronaut Barbie. One of the things I learned about myself taking BuzzFeed quizzes was apparently I'm also a super nerd and geek. So they've been really fun in exploring those things. And then, so as Hope mentioned, we're enjoying some phenomenal growth at BuzzFeed. We're up over 150 million uniques at this point. And most of our referrals actually come in from social. So about 75% of the site traffic comes in from Facebook, Twitter. Pinterest is a huge driver. It's actually our second referral source now at BuzzFeed. And this is very much by design. The site is a 10-year study in virality by our founder, Jonah Peretti. He had a very early on viral hit. It was about 10 years ago when he was a grad student at MIT Media's lab. And Jonah was a bored, procrastinating grad student who asked Nike to print the word sweatshop on his shoes, and they declined. And at that time, it went viral through email forwards. And it really sparked his curiosity into what makes good ideas spread across the web in this new age. And because of that, after he co-founded Huffington Post, he started BuzzFeed as a study in virality and study in shareable content. So Hope asked me to come in and talk a little bit about what we see that makes content shareable. I'm going to start with a few macro trends that we see, and then talk about content categories that are very shareable across the web. So there's 3 things that we know to be true at BuzzFeed. Number 1 is that mobile is the future. I'm sure no one in this room is surprised by this. We see half of our visits to the site come in through mobile. So it's a force to be reckoned with. And number 2, that social is mobile. So early on, we would talk about the Bored at Work network. This was people who were checking content during the day, in between meetings, when they had a quick break, maybe at lunch. They were looking for lighthearted, fun content to fill like a maybe 3 or 5 minute period. Now we talk about the Bored in Line network. And this is essentially people that are bored in line during the weekends, maybe watching TV, but they're checking out for that light, snackable content on their phone. And so in order to go mobile, or in order to go viral, you've got to be mobile enabled, and you have to have mobile optimized content. It's very important, because if somebody sends you something and you can't view it on your mobile, it's a stopping point from that being shared and going viral. And the third thing, very BuzzFeedy, so what we notice is that leisure content is changing. Early on in our business, I think we were very much built on fun animals and very shareable things like that. It really represents a shift in the way that we view leisure content. So in the old world, it was expensive houses and luxury vacations. For the younger generation and for millennials, that doesn't connect as much. This is the most indebted generation in the history of the United States. And so things that are more relatable are fun, lighthearted content that connects with them in those few in-between moments. So what gets shared? So I'll walk you through a couple of different kind of content categories based on the trends we see. We're constantly analyzing and really trying to figure out what makes content shareable for different reasons. And so these are kind of the major categories that we see. Number 1, and the most important thing, is make content that you yourself would be proud to share. And the idea here is just that we share things to build our social brands. We want to look hip, compassionate, funny, smart, whatever it is across the social web by the things that we share. And so people don't share duds. They don't share things that aren't going to help them fulfill whatever that higher identity goal is. And so it's only the very best content that breaks through. And so the things that brands are publishing should be that very best content that you would want to be a part of your personal brand that you're building. So again, cute animals deserve respect. You know, there's a reason why we all love animals. They're cute, you know, they're fun. But really, a lot of it has to do with how we feel. So a lot of times we can project our emotions onto animals, or we can interpret their emotions in a way that we might not be able to connect with other humans. And so animals serve their purpose, and they're very shareable. Humor is inherently social. Again, I don't think this is any surprise to anyone here. This is actually a sign that we have on the BuzzFeed printer because it's always so true. But this is kind of a no-brainer. Nostalgia is as well. So you may have noticed we have a whole rewind section of the site. And it's really because this connects back to the emotion of the way you felt when you were a kid or being right out of college. We all are nostalgic about different time periods, and make sure that when you're using nostalgia as a tool, you're connecting it back to the appropriate thing. People are nostalgic for different time periods and different reasons. I see things like ways you knew you were in high school in the 2000s and think that's crazy, but that really is a nostalgic feeling for that generation. So it's different for different people. Have a heart. So these images are actually from the most shared content piece we've ever had on BuzzFeed. And these are basically, it's from, I think it's 26 things that will restore your faith in humanity. And so this was a content piece that was on the site for quite a while. And after the Boston bombing, we noticed that people started coming to us looking for uplifting, lighthearted content to share. It was a terrible moment. It was a very scary moment, and people were looking for an emotional hug to send out to their network. And so this content piece actually started to resurge. And we saw that it's a very emotional connection, and people that are looking for that uplifting, inspirational content find things like this, and it's very shareable. It makes you look compassionate. Content is about identity. So this is from a post last week that we had that was 22 terms that mean something different in Chicago. So LSD means something very different here. The bean, not just food, and dibs, which I'm not a Chicago native, and I think this is like the weirdest, funniest thing that we put like chairs in the street, but it's very Chicago. This is something, identity pieces are very powerful for niche audiences. And so for me, I always resonate with short people problems. I'm very short, I work with very tall people, and it's always an issue. So it really is about connecting with an individual, and these things go like wildfire within their intended audiences. So other examples of this are a lot of parenting content, ways you know you're a new parent. This is something that you would share with a friend that's a new parent or with your new mommy friends. And it's a really powerful connection tool. So DIY and recipes. We're doing a ton of food content. This is from One Pot Pastas. We just had a really great two-week clean detox cleanse that was highly shareable and got a lot of buzz. We see a lot of life hacks, a lot of cleaning tips, anything that's about making your day more efficient, easier, ways to do things inexpensively become very shareable. Capture the moment. So I think you guys are going to hear about a little bit more about this from the Arby's social media manager later. They did a great job of it. But we do this a lot at BuzzFeed, and it's a powerful tool to align with kind of what's going on in the zeitgeist, really, is what we say. One of our client partners, Virgin Mobile, has been doing this with us in a newsroom strategy for quite a while, and they'll see things. A really great example of it was after the VMAs. We noticed that there was an image trending of like cute, young Hannah Montana Miley with kind of new, raunchy VMA Miley, and we spun out a whole post around celebrities posing with newer versions of themselves, or with older versions of themselves. And it was really, really a great post and fun thing to connect onto. This is a really difficult thing to do, though, and sometimes it doesn't work out. So we always say to have a kind of plan B, and that's called plan spontaneity. So if you're going to go to the next slide. So plan spontaneity is really about having a win-loss strategy if you're trying to align with an event. A few examples of this. Again, we had a large soft drink maker that was doing a newsroom strategy with us for the Grammys and for the Super Bowl this year. And the Grammys were great. We had a lot of fun with Pharrell's hat. But the Super Bowl, like, nothing really happened. And so they didn't have a lot to kind of latch onto and talk about. And so if you have a few content pieces ready to go, if you have a congratulate the winner and console the loser strategy, it helps you look a lot more spontaneous without actually having to be totally witty and catching onto things in the moment. And at the end of the day, be yourself, don't fake it. If your brand isn't funny, don't try to be funny. Don't try to force it. There's so many other things that you can talk about and you can align with. I work with a lot of financial clients, and for them, they inherently don't want to or try to be funny, and they have a lot of legal concerns. And so I think for brands like that, it's much more about getting out your brand pillars of if you're enabling someone's life to be better and more efficient or those kind of things. It can be very powerful. So don't try to force things that don't work for you or your brand. And then last, people do not share embarrassing things. Again, this goes back to we're building our brands. We have a no haters policy at BuzzFeed, and it's because negativity just doesn't work across the social web. And so make sure your tone is uplifting, positive, upbeat. It just is much more spreadable. So I've mentioned this a little bit, but there's an art and a science to creating great content. I think we don't talk about this enough at our company, but we have a third of the company that's editorial, a third of the company that's business and advertising people like me, and then a third of the company that's tech and data. And that was really the root of BuzzFeed. But the idea is that you've got to really apply the science and know why and how things are spreading. We do a lot of social listening. We do a lot of like digging into like what platforms are driving different kinds of traffic, and so have an idea of that. And kind of skipping ahead, but so basically all of the metric internally that we judge everything by is a social lift. So if you go to the next slide, we're just looking at what the paid and what the earned payout is. And so if you look at the site, the content that you see on the homepage is what's hitting its most viral stride, what's being shared the most. We're putting out 300 to 400 pieces of content a day. Most of those pieces don't see the light of day because very early on they're not being shared, and so they die. But the pieces that are reaching the top of the homepage are the pieces that are really, really hitting their viral stride. You've got to create a lot of content to be able to kind of figure that stuff out. And what we find is that content behaves differently on different platforms. So Twitter is a really great place for pop culture, very quick news cycle kind of information. Typically, the life cycle of Twitter content is about 1 to 2 days, and then it kind of fades out or cycles through. Facebook is much longer. It's about 3 to 4 days. This is also a much more kind of emotional place. It's where people are connecting with family and friends, so it's a little bit more intimate, but then you're also kind of like building your brand. And what we see is that Pinterest lasts for over a month. Their content is highly visual. It's things that's aspirational that you're pinning and coming back to. And so it's worth investing in better graphics and a little bit more hash out posts for that kind of platform. And at BuzzFeed, we believe that if content can be social, ads can be too. So very early on in the site, they made a decision to not have any banner ads, and that all of our advertising would mimic the look and feel of editorial and would be just as engaging and just as shareable as the editorial content we were creating. And so what we find is that, like good TV ads, social ads tell a story, they're not heavy-handed, and they involve people emotionally. So I'm going to show you a few examples of some campaigns that have done a really good job of that. There's some best-in-class examples. So the first one is for Glade. So, oh yeah, we're not playing those. No, just, yeah. No, they're just examples of really great TV ads from the past. So Glade worked with us. They had an insight that scent is very emotional, and we attach very strong emotions to different scents. And so we worked with them to play up a nostalgia post, a nostalgia angle. One example is 20 smells from your childhood, so it was like a fresh box of crayons, or 14 mouth-watering smells that will get you hungry for Thanksgiving. And the idea was we looked at their annual marketing calendar. We picked out a few events like spring, the holidays, fall, that had strong scent kind of attachments, and created posts that kind of aligned with those. We also filled in the in-between times with things talking about joy and great moments and things like that. So it created a robust library of content for them that all drove back to this best feelings hashtag and helped amplify their social strategy. So this is a really successful campaign and helped create a very emotional connection with readers. The next is a little bit more product specific. So for Quaker, over the winter, they launched a new oatmeal that was like, it had like a crunchy granola you could add to it. And so in one example, they wanted to talk about being warm and toasty because it's how you feel when you eat oatmeal. And in another example, they wanted to talk about things that are better when crunchy. So it was introducing some of the product attributes and features into the post. We had a little bit stronger call-in than we typically do with this post, but it worked because it was a new product that they were bringing out, and I think people were okay to engage with it in that way. So another really interesting example is GE. GE has been a long-term partner of ours at BuzzFeed. They have been working with us for probably 2 or 3 years. And it's really interesting because GE doesn't sell anything, right? Like, you're not going to go buy a Boeing engine. But what they're selling is their company culture and their brand alignment of innovation. So GE's tagline is imagination at work, I believe. And the idea is that we, again, looked at their marketing calendar, aligned with a few events that were relevant to them. So one was Inventors Day, another was Gravity Day, another was Pi Day, which they had a lot of fun with, actually. And the idea was to get out this feeling with GE being an innovative company. This was actually a recruitment message at the end of the day. And so it's a different way to approach something. None of their posts were funny, but they were aligned with one of their brand pillars that they wanted people to think of them for and get out. And then my last example includes a brand study. So this was with Taco Bell. Taco Bell is another long-term partner. They had a campaign around Taco Bell grillers, which was like a Taco Bell appetizer, and the theme of it was too good to share. You can share your chalupa, but like not your new loaded griller. And so they had a series of posts around things that shouldn't be shared. And so these were actual Foursquare check-ins, which I find very questionable, but they were. People were checking in at the Brazilian Wax Center and jail. I think probably goes back to like, don't share embarrassing things, but I don't think these people knew that. So the payoff for Taco Bell with this campaign is on the next slide. What we saw is like, yes, of course, they got a brand lift from having the content out there, and that was great. But the real payoff was getting people to talk about Taco Bell and share this Taco Bell message with their family and friends. They saw over a 500% brand lift among the people that had engaged with the content because it had been shared with them by a family member. And there's a peer-to-peer word-of-mouth endorsement factor that you get when you're creating this really shareable content and getting people to talk about your brand. That's very powerful. So I believe, yeah. So, my key takeaways. Social content is an art and a science. You've got to be looking at both aspects. People share things that they connect with emotionally. This is something we're always reminding our partners. It all comes back to emotion. It's what emotion do you want somebody to feel when they interact with your brand? You don't always know which ideas will spread, so you need to experiment and have some fun. Cool. Any questions? Yeah, I mean, because I think that goes back to the compassion angle. And so we actually just had a really great campaign for like, don't text while you're driving. And so advocacy does work, and there's good reminders. I mean, we've worked with healthcare coverage. Like Get Covered Illinois was a client for a while, and I think that anything that's talking about, those are things that people really care about, and that's a pillar that they're gonna stand behind in a chair. So yeah, I think it would work. Yeah, it's a good question. So, so the question is, if luxury doesn't work, what does? So we see a lot of very aspirational travel. I mean, this generation like hasn't gotten to travel. They are graduating from college and just struggling to find a job. And so we see places to see before you die, the most beautiful like Italian villages. You can go to the BuzzFeed travel section and see like what has trended, but it's a lot more aspirational, and it's almost like Pinteresty. It's like someday I'll do this. Or a lot of like cheap travel, so camping hacks, things that are more focused to how can I actually attain this, or when I can finally do it, what would it be? It's more experience-based. I think there's a couple things. So like one thing we're seeing is that we're very much moving into hard news, and news just isn't as shareable. It's not going to have the same viral lift as a cat. It's terrible to say, but it's true. And so so you have to have an understanding of that. Like, if the content that you're putting out there just isn't naturally as shareable, that's one thing. I think when you look at different platforms, you've got to align it with your publishing schedule. So if you have kind of a capture the moment type thing, push that out on Twitter immediately. And then maybe it's something that you backfill in with, Facebook, and maybe you develop like a longer version for Pinterest. But I think having an idea of like where this piece of content is in its own life cycle, and knowing what platform to go to helps. Yeah, so the quizzes have been really fun. So 2 of the 3 quizzes that I showed you were editorial. One was a branded post. The Barbie one was a branded post we worked with Mattel on. And they were, I think, one of the first quiz partners. The quizzes have been interesting because it was something that we're always testing new formats. And so it was something that we had been testing for a while. When we finally figured it out, the kind of game changer with quizzes was, number 1, the headline. What city should you actually live in? Adding the word actually to the headline helped that have a boost. And then the other thing was having the visual responses. So then rather than, now we're doing some long form quizzes where it's like check 50 answers and you'll get a percentage of what you are. But the original version of the quiz format was having very visual answers. I think that the people that are taking them, it really is targeted to content finding its intended audience. So, a quiz about, I'm trying to think of a really good one, but ways how ready are you to be married? I think was one. When are you actually going to get married? Was one that was on the homepage today, and that's going to appeal to, not me. I just got married last year, but someone that's in that life stage. And I think a lot of times what we see is if you're trying to reach a demographic of moms, or if you're trying to reach young, just out of college, or there's different ways to approach that content, and often it's what's going on in their life that's going to be relevant for them. I think a lot of times people are coming to us to amplify a social strategy. And so most times a client will come to us and they'll say, hey, I'm using this best feelings hashtag. How can we use that campaign and amplify it with content on BuzzFeed? We don't typically create hashtags for a specific campaign, but it's also because people, when they're sharing things, aren't usually adding hashtags, they're just sharing the post. Yeah, so you're competing with the 300 posts that we're putting out a day, and we've had community posts on the homepage, and it does happen, but it's it's great to, I think it's great to have something to share on your own social channels though, and to also it goes through the process of what is my brand voice and how can I hone that down and how are people reacting to it. So typically we'll start with when we're working with brands, we'll start with an idea of, brands will come to us and say, with Glade, they have the insight of, we want to get out the emotion behind scents. And so brands will come to us with an idea. They'll come to us with what some of their brand pillars might be. For a client like GE, they'll say, we want to be perceived as really innovative. And so we have a creative team in-house that develops, that's their whole focus, is developing really thought starters. So we'll start with just a headline. The client will approve a general direction or a headline, and then we'll actually go through and start to list out, create the entire post. And there's a lot of revisions in that process. I think that it's a mix of figuring out the flow of what works and the different things you want to hit on. I would say that the struggle that we have a lot of times is not to be overly branded. And so making sure you have a light touch and you're kind of giving people a content gift of things that they want to engage with and share with. If you're overly branded, it just doesn't get shared. And so that's usually the process. Cool, awesome, all right, thanks.